Ladies and gentlemen, today we have the pleasure of talking to none other than Terry Wolfe. With a staggering 170K followers on TikTok, a strong presence across multiple social media platforms, Wolfe is not merely an author but a digital star. His influence spans far and wide. He has etched his name into the history of literature with works such as Maybe Everyone is Wrong, a critically acclaimed masterpiece boasting a 4.5-star ratings on Amazon. That's not his only piece of work, though, as it extends further with books as Fire in the Rabbit Hole and A Stealth Game, each a testament to his critical thinking and narrative finesse. But his journey into the limelight wasn't a conventional one. It all started with a humble fan site dedicated to the iconic video game series Metal Gear Solid. Serving as a catalyst for his ascent into the digital sphere, since then his rise has been fueled by a relentless dedication to crafting compelling stories and fostering genuine connections with his audience. Prepare to join me as we unravel the layers of talent, passion, and ingenuity to define the person with us today, Terry Wolfe. How have you been?
I've been good. How's it going? It's interesting to I like meeting new people and seeing totally different audiences and stuff like that. One of the things about TikTok that I found invigorating, even though I sort of assumed that I would hate TikTok, and in some ways I did. The nice thing about it was that I got to meet so many different types of people who had so many different interests that it's sort of like you're just in the middle of it felt like you're sort of in the middle of a huge battlefield and there's just gunfire everywhere and you're in the crossfire and it's just like, okay, this guy's talking about this now, this guy's talking about that, and you just sort of are forced to be quick on your toes, and I kind of thrive in that environment. I'm never afraid of meeting new people or having different discussions. So yeah, it's good to be here, and I could jump into whatever you want, and I like trolls. I like I was a troll myself when I was younger, and that's sort of my history with the Metal Gear community when I started there, and I'm just I'm a fan of the fact that we get to do this with the internet. Like, I grew up before the internet, and when it was catching on and these technologies and platforms were becoming available, it was like, hell yeah, let's get mixed up in an international conversation. I don't care where it is in the world, and see where it goes from there. So, and I used my real name, and I haven't been afraid of that. It's like, publishing books was sort of a huge turn to like collect my thoughts into an actual piece, a volume that people can own, and that was a huge step for me when I don't know how long ago it was by now, probably close to 10 years ago. And then to my surprise, it's like very positive reception, great reviews, and then the podcast scene sort of is this thing that can nicely bring attention back to topics, even if like older books that I've written and stuff. So I get the chance to revisit things that I like to talk about. So yeah, for me, this is all just part of the magic of, as they say in Metal Gear Solid 2, one of my favorite games of all time, the magic of the digital age, that we can share these things with each other.
Yeah, it seems like whenever I was trying to look into Start, I saw a lot of connections to the fan site. But when I went to visit it, I don't think it's around anymore. What was it during its time?
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because I'm literally trying to resolve that with my host. There's some problem. It's supposed to still be there. They fixed it for a couple of days, and then now it's back down. So I don't know if there's something on their end. There's maybe some sort of database error or something. But I guess I'm gonna have to stay on top of it and find out what the root problem is. But when it starts working again, because I'm still paying for the hosting, so I mean it
Got to
should
be there.
It's mainly it's a splash page with links to a bunch of my favorite articles that I've written, links to my books, and then the last while, instead of doing like a blog style update, I decided to go in more of a direction of releasing PDFs. So it's like I'll do it's almost like a newsletter. You can just download a PDF, and then it has a bunch of articles in one document. And so I did it one. I haven't been active on that website because I've been doing all my other stuff, but I did one just recently, like 2 months ago or so, sort of revisiting what's going on with Hideo Kojima and the pop culture and what's been going on with me, just to update fans on there. And yeah, it's weird for some reason the website's down now, but it'll be back soon. I hope. I'm gonna have to
Gonna have
kick
to
some butt.
put some boots on the ground and figure out what happened.
Yeah, unfortunately, and it's like it's been around since 2008. I've never had these problems before, so I'm really gonna have to get some technical person over there to just like sort it out for me, because I didn't change anything. I didn't make any big changes on my end. So hopefully it's not some sort of DDoS or something. I don't think there's anybody who hates me that much.
You know, it was very weird to see like the twist in like content from like, you know, Metal Gear Solid opinions to very like esteemed, and you like research, you put a lot of thought process. You can see like the critical thinking that goes into your books. Do you like, what would you say that you've taken from like making the post on Metal Gear Solid to now?
Well, there's a huge overlap in one sense, which is that I've always gone against the grain of what everyone else thinks is true, and I've been able to win over people by sort of pointing out the flawed logic of what everyone else is assuming. And in the Metal Gear series, you know, it's been going for ages, and you know, it was really blew up in popularity on the PlayStation 1 in 1998, and I was a huge fan of the original game. I mean, it's not the original game; it's the original. There were two games before the Metal Gear Solid 1 that I never played, and basically nobody in America played. But the PlayStation 1, you know, I got into, and like, there's the main story. There's the things that most people are interested in. There's this whole kind of fan base around it, but they didn't want to look that much deeper into the themes of the story and how it connected to the real world. So there's a lot of actually pretty sophisticated commentary in the games that I thought were very interesting because they were relevant to real life, but the fans basically just wanted to get into the characters and sort of the silly aspects of the games that, you know, the internal logic of the world, where I'm like, you know, he's talking about the Gulf War syndrome and, you know, why soldiers are dying from this mystery illness that the Pentagon doesn't acknowledge as being a real syndrome. They say it's just in their head, and they're blaming depleted uranium. It's like, and then if you look into that, it's like that ties into stuff like the you know, the vaccine program that they were doing at that time and blowing up the I'm going to actually blank on what it is, but there's the bombing of that one building in America, this government building that
With the semi truck. Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about though.
the van planted out front and stuff like that. And I wrote an article about that not that long ago, but now I'm blanking on the name of it. But like X-Files did a movie that basically was commenting on the same thing, and there's this doctor that is trying to reveal the truth that there were actually all these records in that building that they blew up that had to do with the vaccine program that they were using on the soldiers. And I'm like, the Metal Gear series, right from like the beginning, has been trying to basically subtly raise awareness of corruption in the American establishment stuff. But like, that's nobody in the fan community wants to talk about those things. And so it's sort of similar in that sense, where I'm always trying to see what's relevant and sort of make it, extract it, study it, see how it's relevant to people, and then make it accessible to everybody. And these other guys are sort of like gatekeepers that just like to have their little fan community, and it's about just hanging out with each other and sort of being very insular and inward looking. And I was always like, let's try to get everybody to understand why this is interesting and why it's, you know, it raises a bunch of interesting topics. And that applies to Christianity and applies to the religious world and the conspiracy theory, political world, and all these things. It's like, that's basically what I was doing on TikTok. I mean, I wrote Maybe Everyone is Wrong, which, yes, it was a gigantic pivot from talking about video games to suddenly talking about end time prophecy. But, you know, the overlap in both cases is this sort of interest in where the world is headed and what's going on. And Metal Gear Solid, I wouldn't be a fan of the Metal Gear Solid series if it didn't have these themes that overlapped with conspiracy theories and with the real world. I mean, he made Hideo Kojima in that video game series. They made predictions that were unreal. His commentary on the digital age and censorship and the rise of AI and these types of things, they're only now becoming evident to people in the mainstream. But he had a whole game commenting on that in 2001, and it's like, I was trying to point this out, how crazy it is that he was so far ahead of time. And I don't think it was just that he was a good guesser. I think, there's something about the Japanese culture that they have. Japan doesn't have a traditional military because they've been demilitarized by the United States after World War II, but they do have an intelligence service that is top notch, that has spies all over the place and has insider information. And so it's actually possible that they know things about the American plan for the next couple decades ahead of time, and that if you're connected to the right people, you could actually have a Japanese creator leak information essentially ahead of time about what's going to happen in American politics and the technological world, which is very deeply connected. And then these video games might have actually been sort of like an early warning that he was trying to give about things. It's like, for me, that's like so much more interesting than just the plot of the game and the sort of the melodrama of what happens in the individual events. There's a larger commentary there. And, in the meanwhile, the whole time I was into video games, and I was just a teenager and, just a young guy trying to pay lip service to this series that I liked. I was attending prophecy conferences, which is where a bunch of educated Christian scholars and experts get together and they try to figure out what's going on with current events and how it might be fulfilling prophecy in the Bible and things like that. So it's like, it's not like I switched interests. I was interested in both the entire time, but I sort of dropped the video game thing because when the pandemic and the lockdowns happened, it's like, okay, I don't know how much longer we have with a free and open internet. I don't know how much longer we can have conversations about anything. I'm going to have to pivot completely to this other topic that I'm more passionate about, but I was sort of leaving on the side because, I thought I would have a long time to explore these topics and not have to sort of go for the throat right away and put my cards on the table and say where I think we're actually going.
It's actually, yeah, it's very interesting when you talk about the subplot, like referencing real life, because there's a really interesting game right now called Helldivers 2, and there's an entire subplot in the game about like how not to trust like democracy blindly and how not to trust officials blindly in the game. And it was like, it's a very big point in the game, but as soon as it dropped, everyone views it as like, we gotta ride for democracy and like put it all effort in democracy. And it's like, guys, do you not see like the point behind the story is that maybe you shouldn't trust the democracy blindly. So it's very interesting that even, it always feels like when people drop like political or like when they have critical thought in their like games, that sometimes people can just miss it entirely when it's right there in your face.
I haven't played Helldivers 2, but I keep seeing ads for it and people hyping it up on TikTok, which is cool. It seems like a fun game that has a very tongue-in-cheek sort of way of trying to critique, patriotism and mindless, because I think from what I can tell, it's doing a very Starship Troopers type of thing where it's like, it's inviting you to be that ultra nationalistic, hyper patriotic, jingoistic sort of shallow, like hype around something like democracy, whereas it's actually just an imperial campaign to conquer, and and it's very if it is some sort of parallel like commentary satire on real life, it would be like, it's very xenophobic, it's very about destroying the unknown and destroying the enemy and stuff. That's all stuff that Starship Troopers had done so well, and I love that movie. And that movie too, I thought was very interesting because of the fact that people didn't really get it. It actually managed to walk that line where so many people watched that movie and thought it was just a straight up feel good patriotic movie. They didn't even care about the satire that it was actually making fun of and exposing the evil of what was really going on there. And it's, and I don't know, maybe people sort of get it, but they're ironically playing along with it to some extent. But yeah, Helldivers, there's not a lot of games that go that far, I think, and actually have a commentary that they can pull off both. They can get people in, and certainly Metal Gear Solid, there was a lot of people who played it just as being a military strategy game where you save the world. But like, if you actually pay attention to the plot in pretty much every single game, you're actually the bad guy. You're the one that is destroying the world. You're the one that's overthrowing legitimate resistance to a conspiracy. You're the one that's you're basically the agent of the shadow government that is trying to suppress people and censor the internet and genetically modify people and release viruses into the world and stuff. And so you're always sort of betrayed at the end, and you sort of reveal that it's your whole mission was a sham and stuff. And it's I understand why young people, teenagers and whatever, they don't care. But as I got older, it's like I'm starting to see this stuff, and then I see it in real life. The narrative's starting to play out, and it raised my respect for it. It takes it into an art form that is more than just entertainment, and it's kind of a postmodern, subversive, satirical way of telling stories that I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, it seems like a good line to draw is like where you can make them think, and also at the same time you put them in the position of the people that like fall for the propaganda. It seems like that's how you make people actually critically like think about what they're being told. It feels like a good idea. Speaking of like conspiracy theorists and like propaganda, I did want to talk about on page 12 of Maybe Everyone Is Wrong. You do talk about how Christians are like conspiracy theorists because they have to have skepticism towards government, education, and secular propaganda. How do you balance out healthy skepticism with unhealthy? Like, how would you personally view it? And what do you think would be good tips for people that want to do so?
Huh. Okay. I guess for my upbringing, I was literally raised to not trust the government. Like my parents would tell me that everybody in power is corrupt, and that nobody's got your back, that they're just going to screw us over increasingly as time goes on. And so it was a very pessimistic, black-pilled sort of outlook on government and everything. So for me, I never had a environment where it was like, oh no, that's our representative, he's looking out for my best interest. Or the news and media and stuff, they're like just trying to tell the truth. So I think people are sort of contagiously, and obviously through the lockdowns and stuff, there's so much disinformation and stuff that they are waking up, so to speak, to all this deception that's been going on. And for me, that's very interesting to see it happening now, because when I was younger, you couldn't talk to anybody about that kind of stuff. You would be, if you brought up a conspiracy theory in real life with a real person, not in some online forum or some corner of the internet, but like in real life, people would be very uncomfortable. They would argue with you. They'd have an emotional, defensive reaction. And now it's like, it's sort of the same thing if you don't believe that everything is lies. Like it's actually very popular and appealing for young people and stuff. Like I saw on TikTok, there was a video that stuck in my mind of like this teenage girl saying like her opening line, if she wants to talk to a guy, is like, "What's your conspiracy theory that you go for?" And it's like this is a high school teenage girl that it's like she's turned off if the guy's not willing to have conspiracy theories. And the comments, there's like, 10,000 comments. There's like hundreds of thousands of likes on the video. And they're all like, that's such a good idea. I'm going to start using that. Oh yeah, that's so true. And then they're sharing, like all these women are sharing like their experience with guys and how they don't like guys that are closed-minded about this kind of stuff. And it's like that, just like I had to rewire my whole brain, because it's like I remember when I was in high school, and it was like if you just questioned anybody in power, it was like, what are you, a weirdo? Like you're like no, like they might be incompetent, but they're not evil. They don't have any bad intentions. They're just not good at their jobs and stuff. We just have to vote for the right guy and stuff, and everything will be better. And um, so I guess for me, the balance is like everybody has every side has something valid to critique and something they can point out that's wrong. But where you really have to be careful is when you start talking about solutions. And that's the key thing you have to get better at, is to realize that, the solution is always the next deception, and the thing that you have to watch out for. So like the sort of patriotic, constitutionalist, um, stand up and defend your home country sort of thing, that can be a big trap in itself, because what are you going to do? Enlist in the military? Are you going to, now you're taking your orders from the commander in chief, who is the guy that's corrupt. Like, and you've got the national security state that is designed to protect all the interests of Wall Street. And it's like, that's not a solution. And it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to vote for a better person next time. Well, elections are rigged and democracy is basically a sham, and we know that by now. And so like where it ends up, and then you have the whole New Age movement and this idea that by now it's like, just have positive energy and you'll send out positive vibrations into the universe, and you'll manifest a happier future for yourself and for everyone. Like it gets very weird. It's getting into a superstitious and almost magical thinking by now, as to like, how do we get out of this conundrum? And my perspective, as you would know if anyone's read my books, is that we're in the grips of prophecy, and that things can only go one direction. There is no turning the ship around. So be skeptical of the people who offer solutions. Don't have false hope and false leaders. Don't fall into a camp of any kind. That's sort of the theme of my follow-up book to Maybe Everyone Is Wrong, which is Fire in the Rabbit Hole, I called it, because what I saw on TikTok was exactly that. On one hand, you have people who have never done any research in their lives. They just woke up yesterday. They just started talking about this stuff. I've been researching stuff for 20 years straight, and, always looking into the alternative things, trying to find primary sources and doing like a journalistic research into things, and not just, I didn't just have Alex Jones or some guy that's just like, he's my guy that I get all my talking points from. I was also trying to find sources myself, so that I didn't have to rely on these people. And you can find those things if you do that research. It's a lot of homework, but now I see these people just suddenly being jolted into awareness, basically, and they're lost and they don't know where to go. So they're just sort of clinging to whoever seems to have a good point, and then next thing you know, they're wound up in a cult-like stream. And so for me, I see the danger being in these rabbit holes themselves, that people are proudly saying, I went down this rabbit hole, I went down that rabbit hole, and you get flat earth, and you get Tartaria, and you've got the whole psychedelic drug angle, and all these different things that they go nowhere. They're dead ends. They're not based on real facts, and they're not productive, and they're just sort of being generated to fill the space, to fill the conversation, because it's like clickbait on steroids, because people are paranoid, they're suddenly hysterical, they're suddenly caught up in this fearful movement of reactionary politics, and just scrolling through TikTok or scrolling through wherever they get their headlines from. And that's like the worst way to become informed, is to just constantly be reacting to things that have no consistent themes, and you're not doing your primary research on your sources, and reading old books on the subjects, and finding the experts who you can sort of trust on these things. So there's like a whole like list of like 50 books I could recommend if people want to get their bearings onto, historically how we got here, and who's actually the primary movers and shakers of this whole um, empire that we're in or whatever. But like, I guess that's my takeaway, is that um, people are being manipulated very heavily right now, and it's very emotional. It's very irrational because of the fact that people can sense that something very wrong is happening, but they haven't done their research ahead of time. So, yeah, I actually have a reading list that I should probably update and add more stuff to. But as far as like getting your bearings and not being so easily deceived by the truther movement, which is just about spamming everything that you see on YouTube and everything you hear from some random wacko who, says that he has all the answers and never proves it, never has any citations, and no real source documents or anything.
Yeah, because like we've done such a switch where like now with Twitter and like other social media, you've given everyone a voice, and some people, make their voice heard before they even figure out what their voice is. Like with Twitter, people will read a headline and now they're an expert on the topic and they'll argue with you for a very long time. There was actually a really funny interaction I saw where it was someone critiquing, it was an anime, One Piece. And it's like, this dude's like, this art style is really bad. And then a commenter on it was like, I could probably make it better if this and this happened. And he's like, no, you couldn't. And he goes, I'm literally the animator for the show. And it's like, because he thought he was the expert on it, the actual people that are knowledgeable on it came in. And it's like such a change. Like we were saying, like people who had conspiracy theories were like the stoners, the tinfoil hats, like the hippies of like in culture. Those were what like conventionally where you would get your conspiracy theories from. And now it's like, if you don't have one, you're gone. You're a sheep is what the consensus is today.
Yeah, that's the sheeple term, I believe, was more or less coined by Jordan Maxwell and David Icke, I think in the 90s or so. And it was, it is an appropriate thing, and I don't mind people using it, but it's like, just because you have some YouTube channel or some place that you go to for your takeaways. I actually have said, and I think this is something I wish more people would start to use, which is, we've gone from the information age to the interpretation age. In the early decades of the internet, it was about having access to information, real facts, and maybe the facts are not 100% reliable, but at least the person is trying to give you the facts. And then you'd have like sort of databases and individual websites, whereas now everything goes through social media, through an algorithm. You're not seeing most of it, but like there used to be pretty much experts who would normally be writing books. Well, they would create their own website, and then you would go to that website to find information. People don't go to websites anymore. They just have a scroll. They have a feed of some kind. So it was about providing information, and then the individual was expected to read that, cross-check it with other sources, and then make their own conclusions. Whereas now, because there's so much information from so many sources, and it's all usually in video form or something that, you can't just sort of skim and take away the highlights of it and move on to the next one. You have to watch sort of the whole thing if you want to get any information, and then they can load it up with filler and random crap, and they never really have to prove their sources because people just trust whatever has good production value, and that's another sort of trap that people fall into. That it has become too much information, and therefore now people just want the interpretation. They just want the takeaway, the snippet, and then they don't want to actually see the information and weigh it and question it and balance it against other sources that say other things and do their own research. For me, because I grew up before the internet, and I sort of like in high school, Web 1.0 was becoming a thing, and like blogs were sort of starting, but social media still didn't exist, and certainly like high speed or high definition video was not even a thing anyone was imagining at the time. It's like, it was just exciting to be able to email a guy who I knew wrote a book on a subject that was an expert, and I didn't have to mail him a physical letter. I could just email him, and I had very interesting email conversations with, certain people that wrote amazing books, and we would have a conversation about something like that. But you're still just doing your actual research. It's just sort of, you certainly, like I said, and it wasn't popular. So it was a lot about being willing to question them, and then they would appreciate the support because they're like, oh, there's somebody, in my case in Canada, who's actually interested in this book that I wrote 15 years ago on this obscure topic, and now he's reaching out to me, and it was a wonderful feeling. But now it's like people have millions of followers, and it's very much about people trying to chase the clout and chase this feeling of celebrity because you're a conspiracy theorist. And like, I saw that all on TikTok too, where this is my second account. You mentioned the numbers that I have now, but this is my second account. My first one had 220,000 followers. And, I had videos that had millions of views, tens of millions of views in some cases. And Alex Jones played some of my clips on his show. He played 2 of my videos on his show that were about climate lockdowns. And, so I had all this exposure, and I feel like I made a little bit of an indent in the actual alternative media landscape a little bit there. And then I got banned out of nowhere without any warning. I hadn't broken any rules on TikTok, but in the meantime, before that happened, I was seeing all of the things that were exciting in a way, but they were troubling because you had people who, again, they hadn't done any research. These guys have basically never read a book. They're just repeating what I say, except they're making it sound more radical, and they're throwing in something that's even more like, I don't want to say like, absurd, but it's like, to me, it was kind of absurd. It's like, where are you going with that? Where did you get that from? Like, I said this, which is already major news, and I have links to news sources, and I can show you the video. I can prove to you what I'm saying, and it's shocking enough. But these guys, well, I'll just one-up it. I'll just take that, and I'll say something even crazier. Isn't that what we're doing? We're all just spitballing craziness, and then they would get a lot of followers. And then as people started questioning them more and more, that's when it becomes naturally a cult, where you're like, well, you must be a shill. You must be some sort of, you can't question me. You're out of the group now. Everybody who's with me, you're either with me or you're against me, sort of thing. And I was trying to avoid that very heavily and be like, just think for yourself. Here, I'll give you sources. Go look it up yourself. And so since the lockdowns, basically, which is what I consider to be sort of the gates opening, the floodgates opening to all of the insanity, very naturally. You can see why, because people are stuck in their homes scrolling and can't even go out and see their friends and stuff anymore. So these guys who have just been enjoying their lives or getting by are now suddenly cooped up and have nothing to do except feel like they're being oppressed and being fed paranoid headlines all the time about the end of the world one way or another. Like, I think that's a major threat right now, is the overabundance of poorly researched conspiracy theories. And I found myself almost more occupied with debunking conspiracy theories, ironically, even though, I was, before all this, I was the conspiracy theorist. Now I'm the guy who's debunking conspiracy theories all the time because they're so bad, and the ones that people are talking about are fake.
Yeah, it seems like you're trying to defend a strong point, and you are trying to get rid of the like weaker voices behind it, because like that just hurts your movement. Like, if you believe that what you're saying is right, and this person is like piggybacking off of that but saying something wrong, that's going to bring bad attention to you, because they're going to start pairing you in with the people saying the wrong things. It's like a cult following with all that stuff.
Yeah, I have to. The more anyone talks about like me having, any sort of credibility or anything, the more I feel like I have to point people towards better authors and researchers than myself. So I want to recommend to people. I didn't write this. There's a book called The New World Religion by Gary H. Codd. This book is like a one-stop shop for if you want to understand how we got to where we are. It is told from a Christian perspective, but even if you're not a Christian, there's just absolutely like devastating, documented, provable, factual, historical accounts of the people and organizations and movements involved with setting up pretty much everything that we're seeing now. Like it talks about Gorbachev and what he did after the fall of the Soviet Union. It talks about Carl Jung and his mysticism, which you see in guys like Jordan Peterson. He's a big fan of Carl Jung, and Alice Bailey and Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophy movement and all that New Age stuff. But then Robert Mueller and the United Nations, and just like there's a lot of things that if you people actually understood that there's billions of dollars and it's been 100 years in the making, how we've gotten to this point. It's not like some sort of accidental last minute, money grab sort of conspiracy theory that I always see people sort of jumping towards, is that there's just a couple of bad people that are so powerful they can turn the whole world upside down as they wish. It's like, no, this takes decades of consistent, organized effort from very high levels across the entire world, and these people have names, and it has been documented. It's not just people sort of speculating randomly. This is an academic book, an even bigger one by the editor of that book. It's more recent and much more thorough, but I'm just kind of scared people would never be able to finish it because it's so huge and thick. It's called
like a college book.
It's called Game of Gods. The author of this is Carl Teichgrib, and I've actually met him in person. He's an amazing man. He actually personally attended a lot of conferences, sort of globalist conferences of these different world government summits and things like that. And like he has documented proof. He has pictures of himself at these events. He still has the badges, the attendee badges and stuff like that. Like he is an amazing source, and he helped edit The New World Religion, which was written in like 1990s. I like to point people to that because it shows you that that's before 9/11. And like that's before the first wave of the major conspiracy theories that came out of 9/11. Like that's where I first woke up to be like, whoa, something is seriously wrong with our media and like how they're reporting this, and why are they covering up all this information, and they're playing along with this conspiracy and stuff. That was written before that, so that tells you how ahead of the time these guys were. Now, very recently, he wrote this book called Game of Gods, which is the same thing except much more thorough, much more up to date, and much more dense. But these are the kinds of books that if people would read them, you would realize how stupid all of these other conspiracy theories sound in comparison. Like that's kind of what the thing is. Once you've seen the thoroughness and the factual basis that these guys are building upon, like you don't have to take their word for it. They say it in their own words what they're planning on doing, why they wanted to do this. You got guys like H.G. Wells, who's considered to just be a science fiction author, wrote War of the Worlds and The Invisible Man and all these famous science fiction works. But H.G. Wells was also a technocratic genius who believed in world government. He wrote a book called The New World Order. Like the New World Order is not some term that conspiracy theorists came up with. It's the name of a book that H.G. Wells wrote, in which he says, in his own words, we need to dissolve the national sovereignty of all the countries in the world and unify the government of the whole world into a socialist, scientific monopoly of power that we can then use to benefit mankind, because we'll get rid of all wars and all internal conflicts and this kind of stuff. Like the whole manifesto is there. It's called the New World Order. And people just, I actually did a video. I put it up on YouTube not that long ago about that exact subject and how H.G. Wells was this important figure people don't look at. And YouTube, has their automatic disclaimer, fact-checking thing on the bottom.
The little Wikipedia article at the bottom.
Yeah, and they're like, New World Order. This is a conspiracy theorist about some sort of imagined global system of control. I'm like, the whole video is about how this was a. I'm showing the document. This is the book that he wrote with the title New World Order, and it's like that's how absurd it is. Is like you can miss how solid the conversation can actually be, and how it's not even a theory; it's just facts. If you get down to a certain level, but that's not as sexy and as exciting as the paranoid, sacred geometry. The symbols are in the look at this Starbucks coffee cup. It has this imagery which ties back to the Babylonian gods, and like that's not the thing. Like that's noise. That's not the real thing you should be looking at. Like they're and on TikTok I saw it all the time too, where it's like this rapper puts out a pair of sneakers that has blood in it. Oh man, Satan is real. This must be prophecy. Like this is the end of the world. It's like it's a marketing gimmick. Like there's nothing to this. You're just getting wound up over smoke. You're not seeing where the actual conspiracy is that has the billions of dollars and is really shifting the foundations of our world and creating the major power shifts and stuff. So, yeah, I think just reading and getting to these actual sources, and from there, you read something like Game of Gods or the New World Religion, you'll have 1,000 other things you can go and start researching because they'll lay it out for you. Now you can start researching something else that's connected to that, and it's not just it's not an influencer or a commentator. It's like finding the source documents, which is what journalism is all about and expertise is all about. It's not about I'm not a scholar myself. I am a fan of scholars and I like to put my theories out there, but I always say that they're theories, and my religious beliefs or my commentary on things, but I will point to people who I respect, who are the actual scholars and academics who can very properly prove what they're saying.
Yeah, it's always real funny how like in the moment people can never see something, but then when they look back at it in hindsight, they'll always be like, well, that was obvious. Like speaking of like New World Order, there's like news articles from like 1920s where it's like, well, Illuminati was a thing, guys, but we all can agree it's gone now. And it's like 1960s. Hey guys, we can all agree the Illuminati like was a thing, but it's obviously gone now. Like it always seems like they look at it in like it's gonna go away thing. But it seems like when you look at it every single time, you always find out in hindsight that there was some sort of attempt to form something like that.
Yeah, and they changed and then the conversation just changes, right? Like it's like that Mad Men line, It's like if you don't like what people are saying, just change the conversation. It's like they don't have to dispute it anymore because now the conversation is about the danger of domestic terrorists who believe in conspiracy theories. That's how the conversation has changed, is that people who don't trust the authority figures are dangerous psychopaths who might try to blow up like the January 6th insurrection thing or something. Like they might suddenly just, do something crazy. And it's like, so they don't have to defend their positions. They don't have to acknowledge the fact that this stuff used to be acknowledged. It can all just be buried under the current narrative. And that's the beauty of going back and finding, exactly like you said, these different pieces of evidence historically, and not relying on the current batch of commentary for your sources. And it gives you a certain immunity to the noise that is everywhere, and what I think characterizes this, what I call the rabbit hole syndrome, where you're just always going down different rabbit holes. That sort of, by definition, a rabbit hole, taken from the Alice in Wonderland narrative, is like it's a world of nonsense. It's a world of inversion and absurdity and stuff like that. It's not clarity. It's not education. It's not a real education on the things that are important. It's just sort of this. You're blindly following wherever this thing leads, and wherever your YouTuber has shown you some sort of snippets here and there. And I think that's actually part of a psychological warfare system that we have now, is to just keep people disoriented and keep them looking for truths, but these truths are actually lies and misinformation. And then it gets that much easier for fact checkers and censors and stuff to justify why we need to shut down social media and clamp down on guys like me when I point to primary sources and I'm not making up my own claims. I just get lumped in with the next guy who's, saying that, some celebrity needs to be killed because they are involved in some sort of unproven satanic conspiracy that is going to, do X, Y, and Z if you don't stop them. It's not the QAnon type people who, just have no clue what they're talking about, but they're reading a 4chan post and saying that this is their prophet essentially. Like, I hate being associated with those people because of the amount of research, obviously, that I've actually done. And now this is the company I get to keep. It's like, I don't deserve this.
Yeah, it's so interesting that like you see that at least with nowadays when there's like a big idea and there's two very different sides, instead of attacking each other's sides, they'll just character assassinate each other from the start. Where like if you think that like the shot was bad, oh, you have to be a racist, a Republican. Like they go with like all these hateful things and never talk about the actual point. And then after the lockdown, we find out that you can't even get your blood drawn now if you got a certain shot. Right? It seems like now in hindsight that if we did actually talk about the ideas in that current time, maybe we would have gotten to a broader and general sense of each other's sides, but instead we just keep attacking each other on them.
Yeah, there was something very interesting. It started to wake up certain people that I was in conversation with, where like all of us were critical of vaccines being Operation Warp Speed ones, especially like not in general, this specific plan that they had here with the military developing the technology and it being not tested on humans and all these just sort of very standard concerns that anybody would have who's familiar with how vaccines were supposed to work. They literally redefined what a vaccine was for this. They literally changed the definition so that now if you oppose this specific thing that they were doing, they can now say you're an anti-vaxxer, which is not true if you're familiar with the old definition. You're just opposed to this experimental thing. But like, okay, so you have these conferences and stuff where these MAGA Trump supporting alternative medicine people were getting together and condemning the vaccines, and each one of them would go up on stage and do a presentation about how the vaccines were evil, and then they would say it's actually it's got little microchips.
Oh,
yeah, or it's got nanomachines. Or then the next guy would come in and say it's a type of this other poison. And so you have 13 different claims on the same stage at the same event about what was all in this. It's like those can't even all be true at the same time. Like they haven't even coordinated their narrative. So like one of them is claiming that there's little snakes and like bug eggs in it that are going to hatch in your bloodstream, and the other one's saying that this is all machinery and it's a robotic system, and another one's saying, and it's like this is just incoherence. It's just, but they get this huge sponsors. They've got these followers. They seem like they're anti-establishment, but it's like it's incoherent. Even in itself, that one event, they couldn't make up their mind what it actually was. And clearly, all of them are wrong if none of them are willing to call out the other ones for being liars. So it's like, for me, that was sort of the bizarreness of this alternative discussion, is that it's not about finding the truth and telling the truth. It's about destroying all truth and having this post-truth world where we can all just have our own personal truths or our own theories, and then we're not allowed to judge each other, and we're supposed to just have this sort of big tent where we have a common enemy, which is this Davos, World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, that side of things. They're our common enemy, so therefore we all just have to get along and be this one big party that agrees on everything. And I don't go along with that at all. I've always been individualistic, and I don't want to be lumped into anyone else's group. And so, I'm sorry, even if you call yourself the resistance or you say that we're on the same side, I don't trust you at all. And I'm not going to, put my flag in your camp and say, whatever this guy says, I'm with him. Like, it's like, no, you could be a false flag guy, you could be controlled opposition somehow, or you could just be wrong or capitalizing on people's fears, which is sad. And I would much rather, in my research and what I've been trying to do is to try to get people to accept how bad things are and accept how bad things will be, and have courage to face it properly with your eyes open, as opposed to scurrying into these cults and then having these false promises of how we're all going to make it and we'll get out of this if we just do this or that, sort of simple solution, something like, buy land and start your own farm. And, it's like, really, you're going to survive a global collapse with no supply chains and, a police state with just having your own farm? You don't think they can think a way around that? They can't somehow shut that down? Like, it's depressing, I guess, if you're, if you've been an optimistic person your whole life and you want to have an easy solution, but like, that's not what I've been a part of. So I'm trying to fend off all the insanity while I should plug my Substack as a place where I've written books, but right now I have a Substack account where I do articles, and I'm exploring exactly this stuff, sort of a thought experiment of where things are going to go and why these different solutions don't add up and how the psychological war is going on. The Substack is called The Winter Christian. And so winterchristian.substack.com is my Substack, and I've gotten a great amount of traction and readers on there lately because of some of the podcasts that I've been on. But that's sort of where I'm doing most of my current work. So I don't do the Metal Gear website anymore, and I am working on a new book, but that's probably some months away, and I'm not sure what the final shape of it's going to be. But in the meantime, I'm doing stuff on that Substack, and that's where I enjoy debunking these things, pointing out how it's being used for psychological warfare, and staying on top of pop culture, but not in that same way of sort of just being reactionary. I'm trying to still find these source documents and teach people something so that they don't need to be running around like a chicken with their head cut off and just reacting to things all the time.
Yeah, it's always been really interesting because it seems like it's really hard to progress on your side when you also have to fight people on your side, because it's always been like, with parties that are always against like the status quo, it always seems like there are some people in the party that are only going to that party because they're anti-establishment. They want to go against what the establishment says because they think that like that doesn't make them a sheep, without realizing that like if the shepherd tells you to go left and you go right, you're just a sheep of a different herd, without like critically thinking about what moves you should actually make. That's what makes you not a sheep, where you need to actually evaluate what you're thinking instead of just being like, well, if the government says this, obviously I got to go directly against it. And then you come up with your own like whack job way to think about it without actually going through like primary sources and forming a really strong like case for your point. And you just make the general point just come off as so much weaker.
Yeah, I think the way that people are approaching this stuff is identity first and emotion first, and then letting the facts follow from there, where it's like, I don't want to be one of those people. That's not my identity. I want to separate myself from that. And then they find a new place where they kind of feel like that identity is cool, or they vibe with it. They think that it's, a better fit for them. And then from there, they start to, go by their intuition and their emotions as to which narratives they are attracted to. And it's like, it's still not research based. It's still not fact based. It's like, I wrote a Substack article recently about psychopolitics, which is basically identity politics and all that kind of stuff, where they're lumping people into these herds based on labels instead of on like actual policies, or just letting people be people and dealing on the individual level. Like Trump is basically a cult. He recently had an event where he was selling sneakers that were like
$400, and they do not look like they're worth $400.
No, they got the T on the side, and I think they say "never surrender" on them or something. It's like that's just a brand. You're not doing anything politically. You're completely a sheep if you just think that that is any part of the solution. But that's the thing. It's just an identity. You just get lumped in with this crowd, and then you believe that that crowd somehow magically, by its numbers and by its sheer passion and by its enthusiasm, will create a solution out of thin air somewhere. And like that's just not how reality works. That's just how cults work. That's just how magical thinking works. And so the same thing is true on the other side with their own leaders um, and in the alternative, which is supposed to be neither side, like Alex Jones and these other guys, where it's like they are influential for sure. They sometimes say very important things. Like I'm not just like Trump. He did some amazing things when he was in office. He had some economic miracles that he seemed to pull off. That I don't even blanketly condemn Trump, even though I think he was ultimately tricked himself and fooled and used in all sorts of embarrassing ways to further this bigger agenda that's 100 years old. It's like people don't want to be able to separate and give things room to breathe and look at the nuance of this whole situation. It's just identities, and the left, what it is really good at is labeling things. I argued back in one of my old Metal Gear website posts that basically they have a label machine, and once you start labeling things, you have to keep labeling more things, because it's like as soon as you disagree or question anything they say, now you get the label that you're a far-right extremist or whatever it is that they want to label you. Well, then the next guy says, hey, that guy actually brought up a good point, and why aren't you answering his question? And I also have a question. Well, now you get the label. And now the more people are labeled, the more they can say, this is a growing threat. We need to eliminate all these people. It's sort of a self-perpetuating thing that they've started, where you label somebody and then they are completely cut out of the conversation. And that then strengthens them, because now they all feel like, again, like we're all on the same side because we've all been labeled. So they become more of this weird cult. The other side becomes more like a weird cult because they're the ones doing the labeling, and they haven't been labeled yet. So they're still one of the good boys, and they can still be approved by the daddy figure of like Big Brother or whatever you want to call it. And in reality, it's like all those people have been labeled are actually 100 different groups who probably shouldn't even be associating with each other if they were critically thinking. And there's these scammers who are always rising to the top and trying to take advantage of that. And I don't know. That's where we are now. And it's an election year, so it's going to be 10 times as bad by this time next year in terms of the amount of psyops that have happened and the amount of stops they pull out to try to get people riled up and put them in these different camps. Obviously, that's the whole thing on an election year.
Yeah, I like how you did the label maker themes. Like it was a really good metaphor to ascribe to it, with the left and wokeism. Like they're always just dragging it along, and I've always wondered where do you think it stops? That's one thing I've never been wrapped my head around. Do you think they would always find an issue where they have to be left on, and that anyone that has to agree, and then whenever we agree on that, do they go to another issue? Where do you think it ends?
So 1984 by George Orwell is a picture of where it ends. It's doublethink.
Thought crime, yeah.
It's thought crime. It's thought crime, and doublethink is defined by the ability to hold multiple conflicting beliefs in your head at once. So it's this cognitive dissonance where, and this is a proven psychological phenomenon, where if you load up a person with a bunch of contradictions that don't actually make sense together at the same time, they actually start to defend those positions more aggressively than if you rationally tried to explain one of them and get them to defend that. Because there's something about human psychology where if you're embarrassed, if you have these contradictions and you're subconsciously, you're aware that you're full of crap and you're not actually, you're just sort of going along with it. You become defensive about that. And so it actually becomes easier to manipulate people the less things make sense. And if you load up people with enough lies, they will become diehard, zealous supporters of that nonsense, and it becomes harder to stop. And that's sort of like they're all in at that point. They have all their chips in this one basket of lies, and that's where George Orwell brilliantly had these sort of slogans like, war is peace, and these paradoxes that are the slogans of that party, because when you can get someone to buy into that, it's almost impossible to get them out of it, because to come out of it would be so embarrassing and so damaging to that person's identity that they don't want to confess that they've been tricked. And I think that's sort of the future there, is where, and then, with the labeling machine, you start to become more and more fearful of the other. There's a lot of what I call paranoid projection, where, and I wrote a Substack about this a while ago, where there was this news article warning about some real estate developer in Tennessee that was buying up a big plot of basically useless, dead forest, flat land. Like, it was undeveloped wilderness, basically. And they were going to clear the forest and like build this little community. And it was supposed to be for conservatives and for like Protestants and whatever. Like, it's supposed to be sort of like this planned community. And they're obviously trying to get conservatives and people who want to get away from the cities and like, let's have our own little establishment. It's sort of like, I think it's a scam, basically, to jack up the prices on this almost useless land and get these conservatives to move in there and sell them on the idea that this is going to be our little utopia where we break away from the liberal cities and stuff like that. But this article was framing it as like, watch out, the Christians are like creating this new like fortress, and that they're going to be like planning their attacks from and stuff. Like, it was so paranoid that it's like, you don't get to that level of paranoia unless you subconsciously have an agenda that you're like, people who have evil intentions are the most paranoid, because they suspect that everyone else is just like them, and that, and so you project it onto other people, and now suddenly you're seeing threats everywhere because you're the one who's either consciously or subconsciously plotting to do something wrong. And so I wrote about that, and it's like, that's sort of where the labeling comes from too, where the more warning signs there are that there's going to be crackdowns. Like in Canada, they're trying to pass a bill right now on hate speech that would basically leave it completely open-ended, and be able to put people in prison for life if they are instigating violent terrorism and genocide and whatever. There's like this list of like very concrete, old-fashioned sort of things that were always illegal to begin with. You could never do those things. But then like just fomenting hate is just lumped in there with it now. And it's like, what does that mean? Like, hate itself is now on par with genocide and extreme violence and stuff like that. So like, they're opening the gates to this, where if they want to be cracking down on their opposition, they've labeled us, now they can legalize a punishment. And then they can, one of the things in the bill is that you're not even allowed to know who accused you, which is sort of like against it, like the Magna Carta and like sort of like the oldest forms of legal protections. It's like, you can be anonymously accused and arrested and charged, and then even in the legal discovery process, once you find out who accused you, you're legally forbidden from revealing that publicly. And so like, it's like this is an authoritarian power grab that explains that all that paranoid projection, where it's like, they must be plotting something, they must be evil, they must be doing something extreme, they're basically terrorists in the waiting, because they're planning on doing basically a purge. And it's like, if you're planning a purge, you're going to start to see your future victims as being these sniveling, scheming rats that are trying to like fight back in some way. And so there's a lot of inversions that happen at the last minute as these things start to ramp up and tensions get to that boiling point. And I think Orwell did a really good job of breaking down what it looks like in a broken down society where nobody's happy, but everybody has to passionately defend this system they're in because they're afraid. And the I mean, he's based a lot of that on the actual Soviet Union and provable historical phenomenons as well that he was aware of. But I would also want to. This is something I found out recently. Um, George Orwell was himself a major critic of H.G. Wells, the guy who wrote The New World Order. So, and you can find an article that George Orwell wrote during World War II. These guys were both basically um, criticizing public policies during World War II. George Orwell wrote an article and published it criticizing H.G. Wells as being out of touch, being a utopian who thinks that he can solve the world's problems by having sort of this rational utopian scientific vision of things and stuff like that. But George Orwell was pointing out that there's a very deep irrationality to humanity that you can't get rid of that easily, and that Hitler was taking advantage of that, um, and that our own elites would have to grapple with that as well if they were going to have their own planned system and all these kinds of things. So 1984 wasn't just about like the Soviet Union or whatever it is that historians generally say. It was sort of a response to H.G. Wells and this technocratic New World Order movement that we're actually still seeing unfold today. And it's a much more interesting conversation when you realize that. And the psychology of it is basically what I focus on, because I'm not an expert on geopolitics or economics or whatever, but I do understand psychology. And so I've sort of labeled myself as being sort of an expert, or not that I am an expert, but that's sort of the role I'm taking, is to analyze and comment on the psychology of the end game of where this is all going and how it plays out. Most people are not willing to think beyond a certain point. Like, they can't imagine what happens if the banks shut down, or if supply lines stop, or if there's a cyber attack that shuts down some major part of society. Your imagination basically goes blank. You don't know what to think anymore. People just imagine immediately a switch to like Mad Max, or like one of these other pop culture references that's sort of on hand and ready to reference. You're like, oh, I guess people will just immediately just kill each other, and everything will devolve into mass panic or whatever. And that's where the psychology becomes much more interesting, because I do believe that there is a plan in place for how to manage people through that chaos and through that collapse that seems to be coming within the next 5 years or so, at least with all the 2030 agenda sort of rhetoric and the timeline they've seemed to have set up. I'm interested in trying to prepare people now for the psychology of what happens as things become medieval, as there's basically a new Inquisition, there's basically more witch hunts, there's basically this totalitarian rise and all these different things, that there are certain things we can do now to get ready and to anticipate what they do. And then when it happens, you're not panicking at the last minute or putting your hope in some false savior figure, and those, which are definitely going to happen. They're definitely going to have their Trumps and their Elon Musks and these other guys that people want to hype up as being the saviors at the last minute.
Yeah, it's about time that we wrap up. I know that you talked about the Substack and the new book and with the fan page, but where do you think that if people wanted to learn more about you, where do you think is the best place to start?
I think just my homepage that is about myself, not the Metal Gear one. I have just a general website where I have links to my social media, my YouTube channel, Telegram. I deleted my Twitter account after it became X.
So stupid. I can't.
Yeah. Elon Musk is a scam artist, and he's never actually invented anything. And X, he's said openly, wants to make it into the Chinese WeChat model, where you pay with it, and it's like there's all sorts of things there. I had to get rid of it. but there's a website, wolfpox.com. Wolfpox is my handle that I had on TikTok. It's also my YouTube handle. It was my Twitter handle. It's an old. Actually, it goes back to my old Metal Gear days where I was on the Metal Gear discussion forums and stuff, and my username was Wolfpox. So I've just stuck with that. So wolfpox.com. It's WOLF, like wolf spelled normally, and then POX. It goes back to the early 2000s, long before monkeypox and all the other things we're familiar with now. But that has all the links. It has direct links to my books and my Substack as well, and my email if people want to reach out to me.
Yeah. Is there a wolf pox? I gotta ask. That's one thing that it would mean. Was there like a wolf pox like disease?
No, I found out about when I was young. I was just like, I heard about smallpox, and then I heard about chicken pox, and I'm like, oh, so anything can be a pox, and then and then my last name is Wolf, so I'm like, okay, I'll do that. It'll be wolf pox, and so it was just sort of a natural, extrapolation from that. I thought it sounded cool to be like, what if, and then like the viral aspect of it, it's like, if I'm going to have a message and I'm going to spread it, I like the idea of the viral nature of the message, and so it's like it's a wolf pox. It's my handle.
Yeah, I feel like it's been a great conversation. I hope you have a great rest of your night.